Tom was an urban explorer who thrived on the adrenaline of uncovering the secrets hidden in forgotten places. His latest obsession was an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. The hospital had been closed for decades, shrouded in mystery and local legend. Stories of inhumane experiments and ghostly apparitions swirled around the place, making it the perfect challenge for Tom. He arrived at the hospital on a gloomy, overcast day. The building stood as a decaying monument to the past, its once grand facade now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. Broken windows stared out like empty eyes, and the air was heavy with the scent of mildew and neglect. Tom felt a thrill of anticipation as he approached the main entrance, his camera slung over his shoulder and a flashlight in hand. The door creaked loudly as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the silent halls. Inside, the hospital was a labyrinth of decay. Peeling wallpaper revealed layers of forgotten history, and the floor was littered with debris, discarded medical supplies, broken furniture, and old newspapers. The atmosphere was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Tom moved cautiously through the corridors, his flashlight casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. He documented everything with his camera, capturing the haunting beauty of the place. Each room he entered seemed to tell a story, from the pediatric ward with its faded murals to the operating theater where rusted surgical instruments still lay in place. After an hour of exploring, Tom stumbled upon a door labeled Archives. His curiosity piqued. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was filled with rows of filing cabinets, their drawers half open and spilling their contents onto the floor. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight as he picked up a folder, the paper brittle and yellowed with age. The folder contained patient records, each one more disturbing than the last. Tom's eyes widened as he read about the experiments, procedures that seemed more like torture than medical treatment. Patients were subjected to bizarre and inhumane tests, their suffering meticulously documented. The descriptions were chilling, detailing everything from forced organ removal to experimental drugs that caused unimaginable pain. As he delved deeper into the records, a sense of unease settled over him. The experiments were not just historical atrocities. They felt recent, as if the hospital had never truly closed. The dates on some of the documents were suspiciously vague, and the ink on the pages looked fresh, not the faded script he expected from decades-old files. Tom's heart raced as he realized the implications. What if the hospital staff had never left? What if the experiments were still ongoing? He shook off the thought, telling himself it was just his imagination running wild. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing moment. He decided to leave the archive room and continue exploring, hoping to find more clues about the hospital's dark past. As he stepped into the corridor, his flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Tom paused, straining to listen. He could hear a faint sound, almost imperceptible, a whisper, or perhaps the rustle of fabric. His pulse quickened as he moved towards the sound, the beam of his flashlight steady, but his hands trembling slightly. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, echoing through the empty halls. It seemed to be coming from deeper within the hospital, drawing him further into the darkness. With every step, Tom's sense of unease deepened. The hospital felt alive, as if it were breathing around him, watching his every move. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone, that unseen eyes were tracking his progress through the abandoned corridors. Driven by a mix of curiosity and fear, he pressed on, unaware of the true horror that awaited him in the bowels of the hospital. The whispered secrets of the past were about to become his present nightmare. Tom's curiosity was now laced with a palpable sense of dread as he followed the faint, almost inaudible whispering deeper into the hospital. He reached a stairwell that led down to the basement. The metal railing was cold and slick with condensation, and the air grew noticeably cooler as he descended. Each step creaked under his weight, the sound amplified in the silence, sending chills down his spine. The basement was a stark contrast to the floors above. The walls were damp and lined with exposed pipes, some of which dripped steadily into grimy puddles on the floor. Tom's flashlight revealed a network of corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, creating a disorienting maze. Old hospital beds and gurneys, many stained with long-dried blood, were haphazardly strewn about, adding to the macabre atmosphere. Tom's sense of unease deepened as he ventured further into the labyrinth. The basement was eerily quiet, save for the occasional drip of water and the faint ghostly whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. His flashlight beam flickered, casting dancing shadows that made him jump at every turn. He reached a series of heavy metal doors, each with small barred windows set into them. The air here was thick with a metallic, almost coppery scent that made Tom's stomach churn. Peering through one of the windows, he saw a small room with a surgical table in the center, restraints still attached. His breath caught in his throat as he imagined the horrific experiments that must have taken place there. Tom pushed open the door with a groan, the hinges protesting after years of disuse. The room was a nightmarish scene. Surgical instruments lay scattered on a rusted tray, some still gleaming ominously despite the passage of time. The walls were covered in yellowed photographs and medical diagrams, each depicting grotesque procedures in graphic detail. The whispering grew louder as Tom examined the room, a rhythmic chant that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. His flashlight flickered again, and he felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the sound was coming from deeper within the basement. His curiosity compelled him to follow it, despite every instinct screaming at him to turn back. Navigating the twisted corridors, Tom found himself in front of a heavy door with a faint, flickering light seeping out from underneath. The chanting was now clear and distinct, a low, almost hypnotic hum that seemed to resonate within his bones. He pushed the door open, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The room was large and dimly lit, illuminated by a few flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room stood a group of figures in tattered lab coats, their faces obscured by surgical masks. They were gathered around a surgical table, their hands moving in unison as they chanted in a language Tom didn't understand. The scene was surreal and horrifying, like something out of a fever dream. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step back, his mind racing with the realization that these were not ghosts or memories. These were the hospital staff, still very much alive and continuing their dark work. He could see their eyes glinting with a fanatical gleam above their masks, fixated on the task at hand. His movement must have alerted them, for the chanting ceased abruptly, and the figures turned their heads towards him in unison. Panic surged through Tom as he realized he had been discovered. The leader, a tall man with piercing eyes, stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Tom with a look of cold calculation. Before Tom could react, the group moved with alarming speed, closing in on him and cutting off any chance of escape. Their grips were strong and unyielding as they grabbed him, pulling him towards the surgical table. He struggled, but it was futile. They were too many, and their determination was terrifyingly resolute. They restrained him on the table, the cold metal biting into his wrists and ankles. Tom's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. He watched helplessly as the leader approached, removing his mask to reveal a face lined with age and madness. The leader's eyes bore into Tom's with a mix of curiosity and malice, and he began to speak in a calm, measured tone, explaining the importance of their work, their quest for knowledge at any cost. Tom's vision blurred with tears as the leader picked up a syringe filled with an unknown substance. He felt the needle pierce his skin, a sharp pain followed by a cold numbness spreading through his body. The last thing he saw before darkness overtook him was the leader's twisted smile, a promise of the horrors to come. Tom awoke in a daze, his head pounding and his limbs feeling heavy and unresponsive. He tried to move, but his arms and legs were still strapped to the cold metal table. The room around him was dimly lit, the flickering light casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. He could hear the faint hum of machinery and the low murmur of voices, though he couldn't make out what they were saying. As his vision cleared, he realized he was no longer alone. The figures in lab coats were moving around him, their faces obscured by surgical masks and goggles. They moved with practiced precision, preparing instruments and making notes on clipboards. The leader, the man who had injected him, stood at the foot of the table, his eyes studying Tom with clinical detachment. Tom's heart raced as he struggled against the restraints, but his body wouldn't respond. The drug they had given him left him paralyzed, aware of everything but unable to move. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Panic set in as he realized the full extent of his helplessness. The leader stepped forward, holding up a scalpel that glinted in the dim light. He began to speak, his voice calm and measured, explaining that Tom was about to become part of their grand experiment, a continuation of the work that had begun decades ago. The leader's words were chilling, describing the procedures in detail as if they were nothing more than routine medical treatments. Tom's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He remembered the old patient records he had found in the archive room, the gruesome experiments documented with cold precision. Now he was about to experience those horrors firsthand. His thoughts turned to the hospital's dark history, the rumors of inhumane tests and missing patients. He realized with a sickening clarity that those rumors were true, and that the staff had never stopped their work. The leader made the first incision, and Tom felt a sharp pain despite the paralysis. It was as if his body was disconnected from his mind, allowing him to feel the agony without being able to react. He watched in horror as the staff continued their work, their hands moving with mechanical efficiency. They talked among themselves, discussing his vitals and the effects of the drugs, as if he were nothing more than a lab rat. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each moment an eternity of pain and fear. Tom's mind began to fragment, the constant torment driving him to the edge of sanity. He tried to focus on anything other than the pain, but the memories of the hospital, the faces of the staff, and the cold, sterile environment kept pulling him back into the nightmare. The leader paused occasionally to make notes, his expression one of intense concentration. Tom could see the obsession in his eyes, the fanatical devotion to the experiments that had consumed him. There was no compassion, no recognition of the suffering he was causing, only a relentless pursuit of knowledge, no matter the cost. As the hours dragged on, Tom felt his consciousness slipping. He could no longer distinguish between reality and hallucination, the pain and fear blending into a surreal nightmare. Faces loomed over him, twisted and distorted, their voices echoing in his mind. He saw flashes of the experiments from the past, the patients who had suffered and died on the same table he now occupied. Desperation clawed at his mind as he tried to hold on to his sanity. He thought of his friends, his family, anyone who might come looking for him. But deep down, he knew that no one would find him here. The hospital was a place forgotten by time, hidden from the world, and those who entered rarely left. The leader's voice cut through the fog of his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. He was saying something about the final phase of the experiment, a procedure that would push the boundaries of medical science. Tom's heart sank as he realized that this was it, the moment that would end his torment one way or another. The staff moved with renewed urgency, their movements quick and efficient. Tom felt a new wave of pain as they began the final procedure, his vision blurring as he teetered on the edge of consciousness. He prayed for the darkness to take him, to end the nightmare once and for all. But as the pain reached its peak, something changed. The leader's expression shifted from cold detachment to something resembling concern. He barked orders to the staff, his voice sharp and urgent. Tom could feel his body reacting, the drugs and the procedures taking their toll. The room grew hazy, the figures around him blending into shadows. Just as he felt himself slipping into oblivion, he heard the leader's voice one last time. It was softer now, almost regretful, as if he realized the enormity of what he had done. Tom's vision darkened, the pain fading into a numb void. His last thought was a desperate plea for it all to end. And then, there was nothing. Tom awoke to a different kind of darkness. The pain was gone, replaced by a deep, all-encompassing numbness. He could still hear the hum of machinery and the murmuring voices, but they seemed distant, as if coming from another world. His vision was blurred, but he could make out the dim outlines of the room and the figures moving around him. The leader's face loomed into view, his eyes filled with a mix of triumph and something that looked almost like pity. He spoke softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, explaining that the final phase of the experiment was about to begin. Tom's mind struggled to comprehend his words, but the fog of drugs and trauma made it difficult to focus. As the leader stepped back, the other staff members moved in, their hands steady and sure. Tom felt a strange sensation, a deep pressure in his chest that grew with each passing moment. His vision cleared just enough for him to see the equipment they were using, strange, arcane devices that hummed with an unsettling energy. The leader began to narrate the procedure, his voice clinical and detached. He explained that they were attempting to push the boundaries of human endurance to see how far they could take the body and mind before they broke. Tom's heart pounded as he realized what that meant, that he was nothing more than a test subject, a means to an end. The pressure in his chest intensified, and Tom felt his breath hitch. He tried to cry out, to beg for mercy, but his voice was still paralyzed by the drugs. He could only watch in horror as the staff continued their work, their faces obscured by masks and goggles. They moved with a precision born of long practice, their hands steady and sure as they adjusted the devices. The leader stepped forward again, holding a syringe filled with a luminescent liquid. He spoke softly, almost reverently, as he explained that this was the final injection, the one that would push Tom to his limits. Tom's mind reeled as he tried to process his words, the fear and despair overwhelming him. The leader inserted the needle into Tom's arm, the cold liquid burning as it entered his bloodstream. Tom's vision swam, the room around him spinning as his body reacted to the injection. He felt his heart race, the pressure in his chest growing unbearable. His mind screamed in silent agony as he felt himself slipping away. In those final moments, Tom's thoughts turned to the hospital's dark history. He remembered the records he had found, the stories of patients who had disappeared without a trace. He realized with a sickening clarity that he was now one of them, another lost soul trapped in the hospital's nightmare. As the pressure in his chest reached its peak, Tom felt his consciousness slipping away. His vision dimmed, the room around him fading into darkness. He heard the leader's voice one last time, a soft murmur of regret as he acknowledged the end of the experiment. Tom's body convulsed as the drugs took their final toll, and he felt a cold numbness spreading from his heart outward. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint, the faces of the staff becoming indistinct blurs. He fought against the encroaching darkness, desperate to hold on to some semblance of life, but it was a losing battle. In those final moments, Tom's mind was a whirlwind of memories and regrets. He thought of his family, his friends, the life he had left behind in pursuit of his curiosity. He remembered the sense of adventure that had driven him to explore the hospital, the excitement that had turned to horror as he uncovered its secrets. The leader's voice droned on, a distant echo in Tom's fading consciousness. He could no longer understand the words, but he felt the weight of their finality. The staff moved around him with mechanical precision, their faces impassive as they completed their work. Tom's last conscious thought was a fleeting wish for peace, for an end to the torment. As the darkness closed in, Tom felt a strange sense of calm. The pain and fear were gone, replaced by a deep, soothing numbness. His body relaxed, and he felt himself drifting away, leaving behind the horrors of the hospital. The last thing he saw was the leader's face, a mask of cold detachment tinged with a hint of sorrow.